Wine Fringe.
All right, guys, welcome back to Wine Fringe. My name's Jill Smedley.
I'm Jake Flottinger.
And today we're here with Steven from Vinoshipper. We're very excited about that. And we're going to be talking about shipping between states and some of the cool things happening there.
And some of the fringy things. In fact,
course.
I think this is going to be the fringiest episode we've done thus far.
Ooh.
We'll see. Steven, take it away. Give us your background.
Hey, guys. Well, thank you firstly for inviting me on. So actually, as a background, none of our team were originally from the wine industry at all. What we did is we saw a complex situation with all of the regulatory rules for shipping. And we thought that this was a perfect solution for technology. And so that's the approach we took, was like, how can we apply technology to make it most focused on the small producers, in marketing terms, the end of the long tail and moving up. How could we give the smallest producers the same sort of tools, etc., as the large producers? And so that's how we got into it. My kids actually were at school in Healdsburg, which is, there's a lot of sort of Sonoma County winemakers, etc. And a big complaint was like this direct to consumer shipping and how complex it was and the silly rules and the taxes, etc. Mm. And I'd just been in the tech business and stuff. And I just thought, well, this is a technological solution to get through this. Rules are either yes or no answers. And so that's how we went about it. And we decided that the best way to do this was, because people were having to use like an e-commerce company, a compliance company, a tax company, a payments company, a shipping company, and it just sort of went on and trying to glue these together. And we thought, well, how cool would it be if we could give sort of a solution that would be able to take the actual transaction, do all the regulatory checks of age and all that sort of stuff, do that, and take it all the way through to literally allowing them just to print off the shipping label at the end of the day. And that was our goal. And that's what we went out to do. And it's sort of, and really, we have not moved or deviated from that general plan. We started with wine, we got into the cider industry, we got into the meat industry, some sake and products like that, but all fermented products that fit under the wine category. Make it easy for the consumer to buy, make it easy for the producer to ship, and then at the end of the day, make sure all the regulatory sides and the taxes were paid. So that in short is what's happened over the last 19 years, and the platform is built out. We just did e-commerce, then we did club. We've got, a POS element to the whole thing. But the back end is all compliance.
Wow. So you created this, and I've been in the industry now for 11 years, and Vinoshipper has definitely been something that's always like, it's something that wineries could use. It was a tool that a lot of us knew about, but like you were saying earlier, Virginia wasn't really utilizing it properly, and I guess part of that's because of laws and regulations and compliance. But now it's become, probably most likely because of COVID, became huge, right? So you guys have,
really exploded.
I don't know anybody now that doesn't, use Vinoshipper or is heading to using Vinoshipper.
Yeah, it's very kind, and we as such, we haven't had an outbound sales team. It's just been inbound sales. It's recommendations by other producers, and we probably bring on 40 clients a month that are transitioning to the platform, like month after month, year after year. It's about the same pace. COVID, I have to say, was a little different. So that April, May, June of when COVID hit, the numbers jumped into the 150 to 200 type of range that people were coming on. But again, us having that compliance element, and COVID is a great example, is, all of a sudden things that couldn't change for 90 years, like self-distribution or home delivery and things like that. Our legislators managed to change that in 90 days. And so suddenly the ability to, have pickup and do drop off, etc. But sort of what I call owning the platform and having our own dev team, we identified that really quickly. And so we stopped all other development and we built out a whole module that would allow for local delivery.
Wow.
Because we knew our clients, it was going to be, you know, what was nerve-wracking through the whole first portion of COVID is the number of people that wrote in and said we were the only income that they now had.
Yeah.
And so that became like a bit nerve-wracking. But local delivery was a thing, and so we built out a whole module to allow our clients to be able to do
incredible.
that.
Yeah.
As the laws
That's incredible. I know that a few of the clients that Jill and I consult for, they're using Vinoshipper, and they've stopped using any other distribution. They're only relying on Vinoshipper.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Virginia has the VWDC, which allows the wineries to kind of self-distribute up to 3,000 cases, which is kind of a lot when your entire production is 1,000 cases. But if you're a big producer, like
or a medium-sized producer,
yes.
like once you're trying to breach into being a larger producer, you kind of.
But you know, even VWDC requires you to like have somebody boots on the ground going to the restaurants hand selling. Yeah, and so it's been VWDC was fantastic, but there was all of the logistics at play. And we're starting to see a little bit of growth with VWDC, but I tell clients, like, you should just go with Vinoshipper. It's they take care of all of that, and they have all of the answers. They tell you what to do. I mean, that's
So as a little history thing, when the regs came in, I think it's Delegate Chris Saxman at the time brought in this concept of self-distribution for Virginia wineries. We actually wrote to him and said, like, hey, this is a great idea. How are you going to do it? And we actually wrote up a whole proposal on how to do it. Not this whole concept of a filing cabinet in a warehouse that's a little like wholesaler piece and all that sort of rubbish. It was just like a true self-distribution platform. And what was really funny is we made the proposal. They said, how long is it going to take? And we said, it'll take us about 9 months to do. And they said, like, no, it's going to launch in 6 months. And, you know, 2.5 years later, when the VABC launched the program, and it's still a nonsense program, the way it's structured. I mean, I love the fact that it gives the small producers in Virginia the opportunity to self-distribute to retailers and restaurants, etc. The structure of it makes no sense. It's a bit like the distillery one that's come in place now. It's like, you know, distilleries in Virginia can ship direct to consumer, but they run the orders and then they have to take the order across to the VABC store for them to actually ship it out, which is a pain in the ass to the store if you've got a club with 1,000 members. And it's unnecessary. I mean, it's just, but all of these regulations get, I'm going to say, diluted down or changed by the wholesalers who don't want this to happen. And, you know, we can probably get into this a little bit later, but the influence of the wholesaler associations and their lawyers over the actual VABC, and, you know, we could talk about regulatory capture as well. I mean, it's staggering in Virginia. It's a great example of what's wrong with the whole regulatory system in the country.
Well, let's dive into, you know, most consumers at this point don't even know about the three-tier system. So I learned it in college. You've learned it being in the industry and getting into marketing and how convoluted it is. Yeah. But I think you're the expert here on that topic. Can you explain that for consumers?
Sure. So at the end of the day, you know, we had you know, the 21st Amendment, we had the 18th Amendment that banned alcohol altogether. Right. And that all that did is sent it underground as opposed to stop it, really. And then you've got the 21st Amendment that changed it. And what the 21st Amendment in simple terms did was said, like, hey, you know, we've got rid of this prohibition of alcohol, but it's going to be up to the states to set their own individual process.
Right.
So the first thing people are completely wrong about is the 21st Amendment didn't create a three-tier system. A three-tier system is not a thing. It is a process that states put in place, which is you've got, then the three tiers are, you've got the producer, so the winery makes the wine. Mm-hmm. when it was first done, they were mandated to have to sell to a wholesaler. And then the wholesaler was mandated to sell to the retailer. So those were the three tiers before you went to the consumer. You know, if you really dig back into the history of this, is because back in Prohibition, you know, organized crime was basically distributing all the products still anyway. It was just underground. And so if you go back and look, is the states basically went to the organized crime, called organized, because they were the best logistics company at the time, because they knew how to get everything around the country, etc. And so they used that structure and created wholesalers. And there we have it. You know, almost 100 years later, you have this three-tier system. And the idea was that nobody would be so influential on the production side or on the sales side, because you'd have these people in the middle to sort of stop anybody dominating. You know, pre-prohibition, you sort of had the manufacturer controlling the distribution as in the end sale, and people didn't like that. You know, we've all matured in 90 years or 100 years. That stuff doesn't happen anymore. But actually what has happened is what they tried to stop doing is exactly what they've got now. So now you've got, you know, sort of the top, you know, I think it's the top 20 producers in the country. You know, it's over 80% of the product. And that is controlled by a very small number of distributors. And so the whole reason that it was put in place is now actually we're back there again. And so it's sort of the three-tier concept. So a number of years ago, back in the 90s, you had the Granholm case, which basically allowed producers to start selling to consumers directly, which made a big change. And it's convoluted different states. It's taken a long time. I think we're up to 49 states now, 48 states, where you can direct to consumer. Different sets of rules and regulations and everything across the country. You know, some nonsense rules that we can talk about, which is like, hey, you can only buy so much per person per month. And now a number of states have changed that to make it so many cases per household per month, which is so.
I realized there was a restriction on that.
I think North Carolina used to be, and maybe it still is, when I was working for the grocery store, when I was working for Harris Teeter 2 decades ago, it was 9 cases of wine per shopping trip.
For shopping trip? Oh, trip. I would never have that problem.
I know. Well, nobody's ever bought that much wine in one trip anyway.
Well, and this is a great example. Again, in Virginia, you can use Virginia as an example. So they put in this false limit of 2 cases per person per month that you can buy from a given producer. But yet you could actually back a semi-truck up to a VABC store, buy everything in that store, and drive off so long as you didn't resell it. So there is
now
no.
Now you said it, they might put in a rule that you can't do that.
Yeah, you know. But realistically, they don't want to, because that's their business in selling the alcohol from these stores. And so, you know, so these limits are just false limits. There's no reason for it. What the wholesalers have described it as in the past is we need to put speed bumps in the process for this thing. And I mean, I've decided now that the ABC stands, rather than the alcohol beverage, you know, control. It's more like the alcohol barrier control, because that's what they're doing, is they're controlling the barriers to consumer purchases. And of course, the producer's side to be innovative with new products, etc. So the three-tier system, you know, it's there. It's mandated that you have to, in many states, sell to a wholesaler to get to the trade side. But what's not mandated is a wholesaler's not mandated to have to carry your product.
Right.
And you get that because, you know, if somebody's producing 500 cases a year, a wholesaler's not going to carry that product because they just don't make enough for them to put feet on the street to go sell it. But at the same time, then if it's not mandated to have to sell it, then you shouldn't be mandated to have to go through a wholesaler, because, you know, if no wholesaler takes your product, you are out of that trade business, period.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, the big thing that you're saying is that it's the idea was probably good intentions at one point, but now it's become this sure, but now it's become this monster in the industry that we all, as winemakers and winery owners, we don't look at, we just ignore if we're not working with it. But this distribute now having to go through wholesalers, they're basically mandating a certain price point or they won't carry you regardless of your case size too. And that's a huge struggle.
Yeah, and it's edging people out of the market because the cost of production is increasing with labor, with supplies, and then our margin is shrinking, and cost of living is still going up. So we're basically, small producers are getting cut out completely
from distribution. That's correct. Yeah. But you know, Vinoshipper, you know, one of the clients that we work with, he uses Vinoshipper, and he's barely 1,000 cases, but he uses Vinoshipper. He's happy with it. All of his clients are happy with the fact that they have access to his wine, and you know, I think he told me once it was like 20% of his entire sales, just through Vinoshipper.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and you know, and a lot of it is this is the only way to the marketplace for consumers, and you have to understand it from the wholesaler's perspective. It's like so Vinoshipper is obviously, you know, absolutely in favor of direct sales, et cetera, but we're not anti-wholesale, we're just anti-mandated wholesale. I think that's an important thing to notice. It's like because wholesale plays its role in certain circumstances. If I'm a owner of Vons or you know, one of Safeway or Albertsons, one of these big Kroger, et cetera, you know, I can't really have 3,500 producers knocking on my door saying like, can you take my product? So the wholesalers play a great role in those big accounts, et cetera. But it shouldn't be at the expense then of the smaller producers doing their self-distribution, being in market, going around half a dozen restaurants and getting them to carry their product. And, you know, then you get the consumer choice. You get some more fun products and innovation. Right. And we can talk about innovation or the lack thereof in the industry.
Oh, God, forever.
You know, as well, because again, it all ties back for 90 years of sort of what hasn't happened. And consumers don't understand, like, why they can't buy online. They just don't understand. It's like, why are you stopping me from doing this?
And they always think that it's the producer, because I mean, I've seen this with reviews on people's web pages and things like that. They always think it's the producer. In reality, it's these powers that be that are putting the speed bumps in.
Yep.
So you've not shirked the 3-tier system. You've just created another pathway for producers to make their products available to consumers, to their doorstep. And as you said earlier, you're more into compliance than you are into shipping. I can't imagine what figuring out compliance for 50 states would be like.
So it's an ongoing challenge. You know, one of the funny things, but we've simplified the concept of it, because if you look at it from every state's perspective, usually the legislation comes down. The legislators care really for 2 principal things and then a 3rd thing added in. So the principal things is we don't want to sell to minors. Right. And we published a great white paper a couple years ago about selling to minors. And so, you know, because we hear from the wholesalers like, oh, every kid is buying on the internet type of thing, and which would prove not, but they'll take surveys of, you know, a couple thousand, you know, people and publish this. So we took 1 million transactions over a 3-year period, and we use a service called Idology, which is a third-party electronic verification service. And so the average compliance issue across the country for brick and mortar is about 10 to 15% where they fail the compliance checks, etc. So they've sold to a minor, etc. Virginia is one of the worst, ironically, considering they own their own stores, which is, you can see all of it, their numbers are published. So we did the same, but with the electronic age verification, we found that instead of it being about 15% on average, it was 0.15%
Wow.
attempted to purchase online, and 100% of them got stopped if you use true electronic age verification. And so the primary, and our white paper has been used in numerous cases now, and to support the fact that, you know, these old statements like everybody's buying online, we proved with third-party data that this wasn't true. So that's like, that is sort of number one. Number two is that the state collects their sales and excise tax.
Right.
And so, you know, by what we structured in this whole system, we guaranteed that the state would get their sales tax, they would get their excise tax. Because of a case called the Wayfarer case, which is about the collection of sales tax, we actually collect and remit sales tax in 39 states for all our clients. And so we guarantee the tax collection portion of it. And then the last piece is the states want to know who's selling what. And so there's the license process. And so, you know, and so we came up with this acronym for ourselves, which was ALTER, which was, you know, age verification, licensed, taxed, and audit. So you could go through those four things. And we have stuck with that principle all the way. So we're ensuring those things. And those are the principal problems. So the fights that we have, and they are fights with people like Virginia, et cetera, are not over whether people are licensed, they're collecting and remitting taxes, age verification. It's modern day process. And by using technology, we've streamlined that capability for people to sell direct. And honestly, the wholesale associations don't like it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Although we have been approached by wholesalers to use our platform to like from the perspective of, can we get into direct sales because we need something innovative once you get out of the really large wholesalers.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody acknowledges that there's this need, but there's a number of organizations that are blocking the path.
So, well, that was going to be kind of one of my next questions was, are you guys acting in any way as a wholesaler for, you know, retail businesses? Like, are you able to offer cases of products to a grocery store or a wine shop? Because I know that's always a big thing.
So not nationally, like a LibDib who partnered with RNDC, or actually I think RNDC owns them or controls them now. Not like that, but we do within California. So we do take, so some of our out-of-state producers that are clients of ours, we will act as their wholesale, as a pass-through to get them into retail stores into California. I mean, kind of again, an unnecessary step why California doesn't allow an out-of-state producer to drop ship directly to a trade account in California. I mean, you know, I know there's bigger world things than I'm involved in, but, you know, a California winery, if you're a California winery, and we can talk about how, like, compare and contrast to Virginia here, a California winery, they can sell direct to trade themselves, so retailers, restaurants, etc. They can sell direct with nobody interfering, no extra paperwork or anything. They get that as part of their license. They can sell direct to consumer, and they can sell to wholesale. So in California, as a winery, you can actually sell to all three tiers without getting anything else besides your license. Now in Virginia, it's funny because, you know, if you get your winery license, and then you can put this wholesale element in there, which is a licensing thing. But you have to then, as a winery, get another license to be able to sell direct to consumer. But if you look on the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, or Washington, Oregon, California, so the biggest wine growing regions that truly support their industry, in all three of those states, they get the right to sell to all three tiers.
Yep. That's incredible.
That is incredible. I mean, Virginia is always, I mean, considering how many people from around the world visit Virginia and how many people end up staying here, you'd think we'd stop trying to take notes from California and just get on board.
Right. You know, and it's funny because the industry is notorious for looking to California for every single thing
we compare ourselves against California.
I mean, they even try to grow the grapes like they do in California.
Exactly.
They're starting to realize you can't do that, but
Virginia needs to start being Virginia and actually start being innovative, which is what you're saying too.
Yeah,
and
Virginia makes some
half step behind.
right.
Yeah, Virginia makes some fantastic wines.
Yeah.
I mean, it just does. It's just it's been there. It's been producing. But I can say, hey, it doesn't produce some great wines in some portions of it. But then neither does California, neither does Oregon. I mean, you know, it's flavors and tastes and how people do it. So, but Virginia makes some great wines. But it amazes me how little support the states will give to these agricultural businesses, because that's what they are at the end of the day. They're an ag business. You know, legislators, they tend to shy away a little bit these days because it's alcohol. But, you know, it's been around for 1,000 years or more. You know, it's not like it's something new, and we don't know a lot about it. So, so there's things that are strange. But when you dig in, and our experiences, particularly working in Virginia, every step of the way, you've got the, you know, Virginia Wholesalers Association for beer and wine, or the distillery portion, which is the state itself. You know, they are blocking or donating to legislators on each of these committees to ensure that either the change is diluted or it just doesn't even get heard.
And that starts to the whole reason that we reached out to you was because I read your article, your most recent article, I guess, about Virginia, and I immediately was like, Jill, you have to, because Jill and I do this thing where one of us will find an article, we'll just email it back and forth, and it kind of, you know, it's our way of keeping tabs on what's going on in the industry. But to see your article on Wine Business website, you know, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday morning, and I clicked it and read it because it said Virginia in it. You got to stay up to
up to date on everything.
Exactly. And I was like, Joe, we have to get in touch with this person. We have to get him on the podcast. We have to talk about this. And so that's what drew us to you, was that article about Virginia, and then reading the rest of your Substack was like, wow, there's so much more to what's going on in the country, because we're not the only state. It always feels like, because we're so focused on Virginia that we feel like we're constantly the only ones in this fight, and then your Substack just highlights that across issues. So tell us the whole thing about what's going on in Virginia right now.
So you know, again, the way that we look at it is the 21st Amendment came along and it said, like, hey, at this point, you know, the state can set up a system. Virginia, like many of the other ones, decided to go with this concept of the 3-tier system.
Right.
But then a number of years ago, Virginia, the way we look at it, made a hole in that wall and said, hey, we're going to allow direct consumer sales. And Virginia actually was one of the more progressive states in this, because it not only allowed producers to sell direct to consumers, it allowed retailers to sell direct to consumers. So it really opened up the market for Virginia consumers to, like, you can buy whatever product you like from wherever you like. And what a great move. I mean, that in itself was a great move. You know, we can go into the funny things like, you know, quantity limits that we talked about earlier, 2 cases a month. Absolutely no reason to do that at all. There's no reason. Because all that happens is somebody wants 8 cases of wine for a wedding event from California, and 4 of their friends now have to buy the wine. And so it still gets there, and it's just like you just stop the one person. And the other thing is it's 2 cases per person per month, so you could, but that's per winery. So do the calculation. So you can go, if you wanted to buy from 15,000 wineries, 2 cases per month, so you could get 30,000 cases per person per month coming into the state if you wanted to. So this limit of 2 cases per person per winery is absolute nonsense. And,
it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
It has nothing. But so what we started to see was, like, you know, Virginia stepping outside of their boundary. They're like, oh, well, you know, we've had, and it's well documented, you know, Virginia sort of saying, like, well, you can't drop ship product into our state. And it's like, but why not? Because you get to control from your wall inside. You don't get to tell us what we can do from the outside. But the Virginia ABC doesn't like that, because the wholesalers don't like that. And again, our experience is, it's almost like the wholesalers' attorneys are walking in hand with the Virginia ABC's attorneys. I mean, it's that kind of relationship. But then a couple years ago, the new CEO of the Virginia ABC was appointed. And so, but when you look at him, he ran one of the largest, wholesalers in Virginia. And then secondarily, he also ran the Wholesalers Association in Virginia before retiring out of those two and coming and becoming the CEO. So if you want to have, and the actual term of this is regulatory capture, which is you own, you've infiltrated the system such that now nothing can happen because you are owned effectively by the wholesalers. And that's what's going on in Virginia, because they're trying to protect their own industry.
Right.
That's insane.
Isn't that wild?
That is absolutely insane. Like, I feel like we just opened a can of worms just with that, but we're not done.
No, I mean, there's so much more to this.
So they appoint this very biased individual to
Well,
this role.
I can't say he's biased, but
You don't have to say
you don't have to say that. We can. But so this, we're just going to say it. Biased individual is now appointed to this role.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as your article stated, ABC says that they can do basically anything.
Well, that I mean, we've gone down this path, which is kind of comical, because working with the legal department at the ABC, they, after this sort of like, hey, you can't drop ship in, and they said, find us a solution. So we found them a solution, and all they had to do is say yes. But then they decided to fight that solution. And so we asked for a hearing. So instead of the ABC calling us to hearing, we asked for a hearing. And, we go up, and basically the way the ABC works, you have the ABC board, and then underneath that, and then they can delegate their sort of legal piece to a hearing officer. Mm-hmm. And so they delegated this, he hears the case, and he finds for our client that like, yes, you're wrong, you can drop ship in. So you think that's great. Well, no, the ABC's legal department doesn't have to be represented anymore by the state like they used to be. They can represent themselves. So on the 30th of day, they appeal their own judge's ruling, because they can do that. So then they make a move to introduce new evidence. They get some out-of-state statements and stuff, and the same judge relooks at this, and he doesn't change his opinion. In fact, he enforces his original opinion in a more detailed fashion. And so, again, fining for the client. So 30 days later, the state appeals their judge the second time and appeals it to the board. And so, I mean, you've delegated to your judge, like, to make these decisions for you. And so what was crushing was the board basically said, he's wrong. We're going to override our own judge, and we're going to use these, what they call plenary powers, which are, like, in their definition, like, makes us higher than God. We can make any decision we like, overrule any legislation, et cetera, and we'll find against. And so that's the process. And so that's when we ended up writing this last article about the plenary powers, because it's like, well, actually you don't. It's subject to legislative review, and it's subject to legal review. But what was interesting, and we put in the article too, was the ABC, who are overseeing this, basically said, like, hey, we've got some outside parties that don't agree with this decision. Well, then when you went to court, it was, of course, the Virginia wine and beer wholesalers filed the amicus brief, and so suddenly you know who's objecting. But what you see is, like, the board is being influenced by the Wholesalers Association again, and their lawyers, et cetera. And so it's just not It's not an open organization. It's not good for consumers at all. And so we just keep seeing it. So this is an ongoing saga. But meanwhile, the Virginia audit group, I can't remember what they're called, basically put out this article that said that the Virginia ABC over a 2-year period lost track of $1.6 billion worth of product. And you're just like what?
Yeah, we're supposed to like track what down to the ounce,
down to the gallon,
to the
down
gallon.
to the gallon. How many gallons I've lost on the ground filtering wine.
And they physically lost $1 million worth of product.
Yeah.
So not only did they lose track of a bunch of it, which is $1.6 billion is a lot of product, but they physically $1 million of product just vaporized, disappeared.
And nobody's being, held accountable for that at all,
the
right?
hypocrisy of all of this, and you're trying to help maintain compliance for your clients. The winery's trying to stay within compliance and operate with this 3-tier system and every other law that ABC comes out with. And we have these laws in place, but now they're just fluid. They can change the game whenever they want, it seems.
Yeah, it's really sad because at the end of the day, we work with, as you know, a lot of small producers. They want to be right. They want to make sure everything is done right. They follow the rules. But there's such bigger powers trying to stop things. I mean, again, you're in Virginia. You know how few Virginia wines are actually carried by the Virginia ABC stores to start with.
Yeah.
And so that's a process. Now, part of it is because, Virginia wineries can sell direct to retailers, et cetera, and direct to consumer. But still, it would be nice to be in those stores, but there's very few wines in those stores in the first place. And so, you sort of just you run into that issue of not getting the distribution. But, and this is an interesting fact as well, is those distributors, those beer and wine distributors, particularly on the wine side, typically they have over 60% of their product is non-US product. So wines from Chile, Argentina, Europe, etc. So then you've just brought it down to 40% of the wines. And then you take out the majority of that 40% are actually from California, Oregon, Washington, New York, etc. And so you just keep shrinking it down. And so, you get this tiny portion that's left over for Virginia wineries to participate in their own market.
I think, Jill and I, we did a Judgment of Richmond competition in October. And originally it was supposed to be this Norton wine tasting competition where consumers got to taste Missouri Norton and Virginia Norton.
And then we'd also have a judging panel judge Missouri Norton and Virginia Norton.
And so we reached out to Missouri's wine board. They were super helpful and very excited for the event. They started to try to gather the wines in the wineries for us. They were even talking about flying winemakers and winery owners out. It was really exciting for Jill and I.
And that process took us, 3 weeks to get them on board and excited about this. And it took us 9 months to basically figure out, we're not really sure from an ABC perspective if you guys can do this. Because they didn't want someone tasting wines that were from another state. They didn't want Missouri wines in the same space as Virginia wines with the consumers if it wasn't divided.
Right.
In a separate room from the consumers. I'm like, the whole point of this is to peel back the veil so the consumer actually understands and sees the value in the judgment process, but then also gets to participate and go to some producers, and they feel like they're contributing to this competition as well.
It started actually way more. It started just before the thing that kicked off all the.
Was distribution.
We couldn't get the Missouri wines here because there wasn't a registered Norton Missouri wine.
But that had changed 3 months prior to starting the project. We had discussed this. We're like, wow, this is a great idea. We can do this. We looked at some of the logistics. We just need to make sure we're compliant with ABC. And ABC basically shrugged their shoulders and was like, I don't really know.
So I called the ABC office 20, 30 times, left voicemails,
We
sent
talked to
emails
someone
once, and they said, I don't know the answer to that.
I'll figure it out.
And never heard from them again. We reached out to the Virginia Wine Board and tried to get them to find somebody to answer that question. They even reached out to the compliance officer for the wine board. I can't remember her name, but she's very nice. But she was like, I don't know. Let me see if I can find something. And she wasn't able to find anything. And then it became down to just talking and passing. Like, we weren't allowed to pour the Missouri wine because it wasn't registered with the ABC through a distributor. We weren't allowed to pour it in front of the public. So they would then have to get
a license.
Right.
And if any of the wineries that were participating had to get a Virginia license, it
just became this huge thing. And finally, we were just like, we can't do this. It's not that we don't want to.
I just found a workaround.
What's that?
What if we turned around Missouri and said, what if we brought Virginia wine here instead?
Right. Well, that's
their compliance would allow us to do that.
So, or we could
take Virginia out.
The funny thing is this is where it falls apart from a regulatory perspective. If you think that, again, you get back down to basics. What are they? Don't sell to minors, collect taxes, make sure people are licensed.
Right.
The structure of it, this is where the regulatory agencies add zero value because they stop innovation like this. I mean, it's just So I was talking with somebody, and we talked about innovation for a second. So 90 years ago, 21st Amendment comes along, we can do these things. So in those 90 years, what have we done? We put man on the moon. We're driving around in electric cars. We use our cell phones, which are really like carrying, like mini computers around with us, and we can do just about anything on them these days and all of that. And you could go through numerous other technology advancements. And so what made me laugh, and I popped this into a note the other day, which is, there's a headline news that Gallo has introduced a 200 milliliter Tetra Pak for wine. So in 90 years, what we've done is we've come so far that we've created boxed wine.
Right.
And yet we've done all of these other things. I mean, if you just start to look at it in sense and sensibility, when we first started out, the reports that we had to file into California were like these really big, wide sheets because they had rail car numbers on them still, because that's the way it used to be. I mean, the idea of having wholesale, and the big wholesale claim originally for they were truly tax collectors. So if you took a rail car full of Virginia wine and moved it into California, it would come into California, it would come to rest at a wholesaler. They could account for it, they could ensure the sales or the excise taxes were paid, et cetera, to the state. These days, as you know, with technology, I know when you put that in your shopping cart to when you paid for it, to when it shipped, to when it arrived at your house. I mean, there's 100% traceability all the way through the process these days. So the arguments for tax collection don't exist anymore. They're irrelevant. But these are the things that the states sit within and still fight for. But they're just not necessary. And that's why this innovation of doing judgments and doing competitions, absolute bane for the producers, because it's like, well, yeah, they're doing this great, wine taste in California, but how do I get my product there?
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's always been a thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, I would say still these days, half the people still probably just ship it as olive oil because it's like, I just want it in the competition. So let's just get it to the competition. Others just don't even declare what it is, and it gets there. But there's no clear pathway to any of this stuff. But that's not the point. That was not what this was all set up for. It was set up to collect taxes, to make sure that the retailer didn't dominate based on a producer and all that sort of, that's why the tied house rules came around and the rest of it. I mean, it's just irrelevant in the modern day market. You can't get the innovation. I think one of the things and maybe it's a little bit further on, it's sort of like what's happening in the market today,
Right.
What's not happening in the market today. Obviously wine's taking a hit. but why? And it's sort of examining some of those whys that's important.
I think Jill and I have always been of the opinion that the reason wine sales are suffering now the most is because wineries are very much, they started with the field of dreams aspect, where if you build it, they will come, and we're going to rely on word of mouth. And it's 2025, guys. Like, we have cell phones and internet and marketing people that actually sit at a computer now with electricity.
The markets are typically saturated, so doing the same experience isn't.
And so the question, the answer to what we think is part of the answer is, it's many answers, but it's bringing wine to the consumer where they're at, not bringing them to you. And so
finding creative ways to do that.
Because there's an event happening across town, and they're looking for alcohol producers, but the small producers can't get into that event because they're still trying to get people to their properties. Where I think what you're saying, and it's kind of the biggest point, is we can't get wine to where people are easily.
No.
Right.
And that's a big struggle right now. And I think that if you want to talk about what's killing wine sales right now, I'd say that's easily 50% of the issue.
Yeah.
So there are a whole bunch. I mean, so one of the big things, which is like doing almost like, I call them like the party plan type thing. Get one person who's a fan of the wine, they throw a meal at their house, and they do a tasting and that. So again, to your guys' point, taking the wine to the consumer as opposed. But then you bump into these silly rules. It's like, well, yeah, but you can't sell the wine while you're there because you're not licensed at that premise. I mean, the concept should be, you should be licensing the entity, not the property. The property makes no difference these days, because I mean, you've got some crush case situations where product is made in different states or by different producers. Custom crush is so the licensing a specific location as opposed to the entity is a problem. Right. And then not being able to sell the product during these events, et cetera, is just another, crazy nightmare. And this is why the new digital POS systems, where you can do tap to pay and things like that, and then ship the wine in later, an unnecessary thing really, but for traceability, I guess. But those are the things. But we also have an unprecedented market situation where we have a new product that is competing with us, and that's the THC CBD products.
But you recently saw something where it could potentially get edged out of the market.
Yeah, they're talking about banning it again.
Yeah.
But there is billions of dollars that have gone into that. This thing is not going to disappear. You will see, and in fact, we'll be talking about this coming up soon. But like in I think it's Massachusetts, they're trying to introduce legislation to make it go through a 3-tier system. So here's an incompetent system that we've already proved is incompetent, and now we're going to try and push something else through it. But it's really about control and money, and so you've got. And those products are innovative. They can do all kinds of different things within their limits, etc. You can't do that innovation in the wine industry. You just don't get that same capability. So again, it comes down to innovation. We did an article again about wine boredom.
Right.
It's like a Merlot is a Merlot is a Merlot. It's like which personally I know it got a bad rap from Sideways many years ago. A favorite wine of mine is Merlot, so it upset me to start with. But you've got these wines, but that you're limited on what you can do to them, because you can make a creative. I mean, we had a program a number of years ago now, which was for Halloween, I think it was, or Thanksgiving, which was I know that might sound a little gross, but it was interesting. But anyway, it was a pumpkin spice latte wine. Okay. So the important thing really is that it's wine based, so it's introducing a group of people into a wine.
Right.
So you can go down that path, and it was sold out in a few hours.
Right.
Now, it was never enough. You would never get it into distribution because it was never enough made. But the fact of what it was and how fast it sold demonstrated there was a marketplace there. It was innovative. It was different. People wanted to try it. You could buy it and say it was the worst thing you'd ever had. You could buy it and say it was the best thing you ever had.
Right.
But that's what wine is about. It's not this sort of generic product that just everybody buys. People want to have, experiment. I think there's a Stella Rosa, which is what is it? It's a chili mango wine or something like that.
Okay.
I've heard of the spicy wine.
I would try that.
I got him to try jalapenos and Sauvignon Blanc, so who knows?
But it sells like 1 million cases now.
Jesus.
And so
somebody's drinking that.
Somebody's drinking that. And so what I call hardcore wine people, who, they're the Napa cab type people and all of that. So it's like, oh my God, that's just horrible. As an industry, we should be looking at it like we've introduced them to a wine-based product. And hopefully they will experiment and try different things, and maybe they'll get into a Sauv Blanc down the road, and then they'll migrate, and maybe they'll become a Napa Cab fan down the road. But it's sort of that process that the market is not allowing. And we've talked many times about the sort of the DTC and the direct to trade piece almost being like the on-ramp to the wholesaler. Because we can capture all of that data, like who bought it, where did they buy it, what are the pockets, what are the areas.
Right.
You can then take that information to a wholesaler and say like, hey, it'd be great if you carried our product. And by the way, we've sold this much into this area and there's a demand for it. I mean, McBride Sisters, they did a fantastic job of using direct sales data to get into wholesale. I mean, you can just read off and go through numerous different examples of where, you use that direct consumer data if you want, and you're successful and you expand, that it's an on-ramp type of thing to the wholesale distribution. But there's some wineries, as you know, and there's those in Virginia, they probably, hey, I want to make 2,500 cases a year. I don't want to make a case more.
Right.
And what they want to do is sell 100% of it direct.
That brings up something that I think the biggest problem within the wine industry as a winemaker, that when I talk to other winemakers, I start pointing this out to them, and they roll their eyes or they agree with me. But the issue with Virginia's wine industry is that we're focused on selling in Virginia, and we're not focused enough on getting across the state lines. I know there are wineries like Early Mountain that are, they're doing their work to get out.
Brand name wineries.
And they're the bigger producers.
Yeah, they are bigger producers.
But Virginia producers are generally too focused on staying within the state lines. But you have wholesalers that are also kind of reinforcing this concept of because
you need us to
move across the state.
Yeah.
Like, don't even worry about getting across the state lines. You just need us to get from northern Virginia to southern Virginia, and that's always
where
been.
The ABC comes in and creates those speed
Right.
bumps. Yeah.
And it's a 2-hour drive, guys. Just get in your car if you really want to sell to South Virginia and Northern Virginia.
Okay, don't encourage people to just drive.
Just drive. But if you want to get out of state lines, it's nearly impossible to get Virginia wine to California if we wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Right. But the funny thing is, and I actually, this was down in Georgia, and I was speaking down in Georgia at one of their conferences, and we stayed in a hotel by the conference center. And so and so this is the conference center hub is this hotel, and I said, hey, can I get a Georgia wine? And they're like, no. I'm like, why not? They're like, oh, we don't sell any. And I've done the same in Virginia. I've gone into many a Virginia hotel and gone like, hey, can I get a Virginia wine? And they're like, no. And it's like, why not? And it's like, oh, our distributor doesn't carry it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's again, because they can't get those products in directly, different states, different rules. But again, it's just that is part of the element. You can't introduce tourists to the product because it's not available.
Right.
And then the other thing, I mean, we talk about things that are impacting the market. So I don't know whether you knew this, but the US is the only country in the world that allows a winery to put 25% of another country's product in it and still call it American.
Right. And I actually just read an article about this a few weeks ago, and it led down this rabbit trail. But please continue on. I think you could probably explain it way better than I could.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you go to like, if for a New Zealand wine or an Australian wine, it's like, it's 100% of that product. In Europe, it can range from 0 to about 13 or 14%. But in the US, so you can get, you could grow some Malbec here, but you can dilute it down with this really inexpensive overseas product. There's an article, I could send you guys a link sometime, that the Lodi Wine Growers Association put out, which actually describes the tax credits that the big firms can get bringing this low cost wine into the US, blending it in, and then getting a bigger tax credit for what they ship going out of the country. So basically, it becomes almost like a free 25% that you add into your product, and it drives down the price.
That's insane.
I mean, we just had a local grocery store that is, buy local and all that sort of stuff, and I probably should do an article on this, but because it'd be fascinating to know. So it regularly sells for $11.99 for a Argentinian Malbec kind of thing, but it was selling it's on special. Now in California, you can't sell product below cost, so you just have to bear that in mind. But this Malbec was selling for $5.99. So if you think about it, first of all, it's come from Argentina. It's got the same glass, the bottle, the label as everybody else, and it's selling for $5.99 a bottle at retail. So it's gone through the importer, through the wholesaler, through the retailer, and now it's marked up, obviously, to sell. I mean, how do you do that? And how does a domestic business compete with that?
Well, that's a conversation we have regularly nowadays here in Virginia is,
with restaurants too. I remember when I was trying to help with selling wine to restaurants at one point in time at a previous employer, like restaurants would be like, American wine, Virginia, much less Virginia wine. They'll cost too much. I'm going to buy internationally, and I can save the money and upcharge, and then I actually have a profit margin when I sell the wine.
But the wholesalers who don't want to carry domestic wines, don't have to. They can introduce these wines, and so it impacts what we can do. Meanwhile, places like Virginia are just worried about where it ships from. They've never sent an agent outside of Virginia ever to inspect. And, the big thing is about health and safety is the last big argument. Like, the wholesale protects the health and safety. There is no inspection process by a wholesaler on any product. They don't take it out and sample it and do any of that stuff. So there's no health and safety issue there at all. So, that's just a sort of a bunkum kind of argument to the whole thing these days. But so the structure can stay as having a wholesale representation. It just shouldn't be mandated. And where the product physically ships from shouldn't matter either. It's got no relevance to, where it comes from. And you hear the wholesalers claim, like, direct to consumer is adding the opportunity for fraud and fake products and stuff. And it's like, guys, the concept here, think about it, is from the producer to the consumer. The only person that can put a fake product in there is the producer. It's like
ridiculous.
I mean, it's a ridiculous argument. And so, but the consumer they don't know this, they don't understand it. The big brands are using color dyes in their things. So there's sort of the transparency these days of what the ingredients are going in, and natural wines kind of get a bit of a slight for calling themselves natural wine, but the wine from most wineries is natural wine. It's wine fermented and it goes in the bottle, and that's it. Manufactured wine, as I would refer to it, which is this big bulk, high volume type stuff. To get that consistency for the consumer, it's managed, as I would say, through its production process. And so, Virginia wineries, I mean, they're natural producers. It's a natural product, but we don't talk about natural products. We just talk about alcohol. And I think, I have never said in my life, oh, I'm going to pop down to my local store and get a bottle of alcohol. I say I'm going to go and get a bottle of wine. I'm going to go get a bottle of this. I'm going to go, and we just refer to it as alcohol. And I think we give ourselves a bad rap because we refer to it as alcohol. But that's an element of it. But we're not buying bottles of alcohol. We're buying bottles of wine, and we're having experiences with it, etc. So there's a whole hodgepodge of things that are going on that are impacting the industry. You know, there was an article not too long ago that called out like, hey, there's a 19% drop in, you know, wine sales.
Right.
Well, that wasn't actually true. It was a great headline because it got us all to read the thing. But, you know, we ran our statistics, and it was about a 45-55 split between those that had dropped a little bit and those that had gone up a little bit. You know, the growth overall was about 3 or 4%. Yeah. Now, there are some big producers that, they've seen 20-25% drops in their volume. And of course, if you represent 80% of the market, that brings down the overall number. But that's not the real story. Those small producers, you know, around the country, they still sell out each year of their different vintages, etc. So I think the press has given us a bad time as an industry as well, and the consumer takes it to heart. And so I think there's some just and the wholesale process doesn't help. It's you know, they put in a piece of a legal document in, like, I think it was either Massachusetts or Maryland, where, you know, we sell inherently dangerous products. So here you've got the wholesalers making this in legal documents. Now in Virginia, they diluted that same statement down recently, saying like, we sell inherently dangerous products if misused. So that's a major step for the wholesalers to put if misused. I mean, you know, a spade is dangerous if misused. A car is dangerous if misused. I mean, you know, but to call out alcohol or wine in specifically as inherently dangerous by the people that are supposed to be marketing it for you, is these are the arguments that the Virginia ABC's influenced wholesalers will write in their documents. I mean, it's in public documents. I'm not saying anything that's not out there. You know, they will write these statements, and it's like, it's just not good for us.
It's really dramatic. I mean, nobody that we associate with is walking around going, oh no, you better watch out, that bottle of alcohol is going to hurt you. You know, everyone's kind of saying, maybe I'll cut back and I'll have, you know, 2 glasses
I hear the
of
most
wine. But only the government would, you know, make these very vague but broad statements. And I know we talked about this in a previous episode with, you know, them alluding to wine causing cancer. And, you know, that was Jill's whole point.
Who was the official that dropped the mic and then left office?
I think it was
the attorney.
It was the attorney general or surgeon general.
Surgeon general. He said, you know, wine causes cancer and then left. Or
didn't give anything to it. No. It may lead to cancer.
It may lead to cancer.
But it was this vague statement. And Jill's point was that
basically we came from COVID.
Right.
And everybody is very health conscious. And then we have very biased groups funding research that's biased as well, then coming out and saying, hey, it causes cancer. It's feeding into their whole mission of, you know, people consuming less. But
it just fed using the word attaching cancer to it.
Scare tactic. That's one of the 2 best ways to market, right? Are to have fantastic hook and scare tactics.
Yeah.
Right.
So
and that does both.
And that sounds exactly like what you're saying is, you know, if misused, well, who's misusing? How do you misuse?
And everybody with health right now is very touchy, about any kind of scary language.
So what's the positives of all of this, though? I mean, obviously you're writing about these things, and we're talking about these things, and hopefully we'll reach a crowd of people. But how do we actually go about changing some of these and adding innovation, as you're calling it?
So, I mean, you know, our view is, you know, because we talked about it. So there's sort of, you know, there's the education, there's obviously mitigation. I think a lot of it is educating our legislators. But as we recently saw, Tom Walk wrote this great article recently, and again, in Virginia, there was some legislation that was, I think it was if you worked, I think it was, I might get the facts wrong, but not far, but like if you worked for a brewery, you couldn't work for at a tasting room or something like that. So, you know, if you're making $10 an hour and you want to have a second job, you couldn't have it in the same industry. And so there was some legislation that was put in place that, like, you know, even if you worked at a brewery, you could go in a tasting room or you could work at a bar or something like that, so long as you didn't sort of just stand there and promote your own brewery's beer all the time. And it didn't even have to. But anyway, so it's a great idea. Like, hey, let people have a job. But they didn't allow, the hearing committee didn't allow it to move forward. But then what Tom did, he had a study of like who had paid them and donated to them. And every single one of these people on this hearing committee had got money donated, you know, however you do it through the lobbying process, by the wholesaler associations. And the actual breweries that supported this legislation to allow their employees hadn't contributed a dime to them. And so it's a great article. I mean, but it's, you know, he happened to write that the same day as I pushed out my thing about the plenary argument type thing. So they both came together, but it showed, and it happens in other states. It's just that it's much more transparent with Virginia. You see it so much more. But Virginia becomes this hodgepodge of like demonstrating all of these things. And it's like, how do you get through this process? And it's got to be the legislators. And, you know, and it's an education. And there are systems that are proven to work. This is why we did the white paper on the age verification. You know, that shows that that's not a problem. The taxes are getting paid. You go through all of these and you'll get these, you know, you'll get some legislator like, oh my God, you know, I got a bottle of whiskey delivered to my house and it was just left on my doorstep. Well, a bottle of whiskey in Virginia would just get left on your doorstep because it's illegal to ship a bottle of whiskey to your house. So they're not. So it's not going to be. So, but did you return it? Did you turn in whoever sent it? It's like, you know, that never happens. And so you get these extreme one-off examples of like this didn't happen. But you know, we're not looking for the answers for the extreme cases. What's the norm? You know, like, you know, kids are not buying alcohol, and you know, if they have access to alcohol, it's a parental thing more than anything else. It's because they're in their drinks cabinet, etc. You know, there's this whole like kids buying online is not true. That's not their access to alcohol. Their access to alcohol is through their parents and through their drinking cabinet and all of that stuff.
Think about alcohol. Other countries, you experience alcohol within your household basically first, in general, and that's just the standard. Here, it's a new concept apparently. The best way to get your kids not to want to drink wine for a long period of time is when they're very young. Let them just have, I don't know, a teaspoon of cab that's a dry cab, and it's like they will like not understand why you could possibly ever drink this product, and they won't try it again for the next years. You know?
My daughter looked at me and said, I tasted her on it was just I think it was just a dry white wine that had just finished fermentation, and you know, she wanted to try it, so I let her, you know, have a sip, and she said, "Daddy, this is sour. I don't want to drink this." And then, you know, I'm pressing fruit off, and you know, she walks out to the press and sticks her hand in there, and she's licking her hand like a bear licking its paw, and she goes, "I like this wine." So, you know, that I'm not worried about my kid going and ordering wine off the internet or getting drunk or even raiding my liquor cabinet at this point, you know.
I almost feel like when you make it so hard to access,
you actually make it worse.
You make it worse because then it's a challenge, and like, how can we break down the barrier?
So you know, so you go through these things, and I think the answers are here, because you know, we work with the Craft Wine Association, and we've created this model direct shipping bill that's modernized from the old 97 one that the Wine Institute put out. But what we did is we, in the points of this direct shipping bill, because it's direct shipping is not just about to consumer, it is to trade too. You've got to allow these small producers, we're going to have a vibrant market for these people to grow. You've got to open up direct shipping, period. But, you know, we put together this, and the bullet points for it are all based on, there is some state in this country that does some of those things.
Right.
So it's tested in marketplaces. It's just not tested everywhere. You know, I mean, Tennessee, I mean, they have a limit. It's 1 case per month or 4 cases a year. I mean, again, just an useless type of example, you know, or limit. You know, at least when New York put their limit in, they did 36 cases a year. So if you wanted that 10 cases in the summer for that summer party, you could just get your 10 cases, and then maybe you didn't buy any more wine, but at least you could do that. And so if you even need a limit, but again, like I say, you know, you can go into any state store and you can buy any number of, or any volume type of thing. You know,
who's tracking it if you're paying cash though?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, now if you want to get onto the conversation of privacy with the states, that's another one, because, you know, you have to tell the state, hey, what did, you know, on the direct consumer side, what did they buy? How much did they pay for it? Where did it ship? Who bought it? All of that data is going into the state. You go into a retail store, you pay cash, as you say. There's no record of that transaction. Besides you know, somebody anonymous came in and bought a couple bottles or a case of wine. So, you know, I think the states have a privacy issue on their hands, because, you know, you've got all of this data, and it's like, why should you have, you know, the name and age and you know, date of birth and all that sort of stuff of the buyers? If you want to audit the systems, go out to the people to audit it to make sure they did things right. But should the states be getting all of this information? I think not. I don't think as a consumer, you know, do you want the state with their systems looking after your personal data of what you purchased?
I would prefer not.
No, well, that's always, I mean, Joe and I are really big. I'm especially big into privacy being, you know, important, but that's a really good point that I've never really given much thought to. But when we do buy something
and get it shipped, then that information
that is stored somewhere by somebody. I don't know that anybody looks at that information.
I think unless it's analyzed for reports.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
your statistic. Now.
Yeah, right.
So in Michigan, the wholesalers actually get access to the direct-to-consumer information. They then match up that data to what they believe are direct-to-consumer licenses from producers. And if they don't get a match, they actually turn that into the state to get them to investigate. So they kind of do like their own internal whistleblower, but they're taking this data, this consumer data, and using it to get the state to investigate.
That's a little ridiculous.
That's ridiculous. And also, as a consumer, I would be peeved to know that my information had circulated so many hands.
And you're being watched, basically.
Yeah.
That's
just one vehicle to do that.
So what other states, we'll wrap this up in just a few minutes, but what other states are you seeing that have, you know, as ridiculous compliance rules and laws as Virginia does?
Yeah, you mentioned Michigan and Tennessee having crazy laws, but there was one earlier that you spoke of.
Oh, so my bigger concern for the industry, I mean, there's many states. I mean, it's like, you know, Washington State, they all got their own funky kind of rules. You know, some are just simpler. Some are just very simple. California, for example, is pretty straight in terms of the way they do it. You know, Florida has not many issues. I mean, there's some states that just like, pay me my taxes and get your license, and we're good. You know, you're doing the right thing. Missouri is really weird because it's sort of, it can't decide what the sale, like, it has a limit, but is the limit based on the sale date, which you have to pay your sales tax on? Is it the ship date, or is it the delivery date? And they would argue that it's the ship date. But if somebody buys a case of wine this month and says, hey, don't ship it till next month because it's too hot, but then they buy another case that month, and so you ship them 2 cases.
Right.
They were like, oh, well, you shipped them 2 cases, you violated our space. And it's like, well, but you wanted your sales tax when the transaction happened. So the transaction must have happened when you did the sales tax. So states can't decide, and then, you know, quantities and all that. But the big thing, and which I mentioned earlier, and I used Maine as an example, and they're going to be one of many states, is they've implemented their recycling rules on direct shipper in such a fashion, because the recycling rules in Maine are based around the assumption that you're with a distributor and you have this funky setup for distribution. The second that they put it in place for direct to consumer brands, you couldn't comply with it. So not only did you have to do your labels, which, by the way, we did do a blog on a label thing, that if every state did like California CA, CRV, or you did the Maine 15 cents, if you did that, you needed a 3x5 label that would just have the relevant information for each of the states plus the government warning piece. So you'd lose access to your entire back label because it would be all regulatory. But Maine did this thing, and so their assumption is that everybody will ship in a minimum of 13,000 bottles a year, and so you have to pay a fee based on that. So irrespective of you getting your DTC permit and having to meet this requirement and find a service provider that will look after you, you basically were going to be paying a couple $1,000s a year extra.
Jesus. Just
to have your license to ship into the state. And it's just killed direct to consumer shipping. You know, wow. Oregon, Illinois, they've got these recycling bills that are going through that are looking at making anywhere that sells the product a recycling center. So if you're a small winery and you sell in a bottle, and you're now going to become a recycling center, not for your own product, but for any bottles that come and are returned. And so you're really a winery, but now you're going to become a recycling center. So that's
attractive. Good luck, urban wineries.
I mean, isn't it? And so take that with the recycling. And I'm all for recycling. It's a great idea. Mm-hmm. But you shouldn't be putting it on the label, and you shouldn't be putting it on the sort of producer. Put it on the bottle producer. I mean, just take a fee. Mm-hmm. And, you know, just say to the winery, hey, you're selling, 3,000 bottles a year. You got to pay us 10 cents.
Right.
And be done with it. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, if you have a Virginia wine as an example, and it's $45, are you motivated to go and get your 10 cents back on that bottle of wine? You're really not. Mm-hmm. And if you did an amount that motivated you, $5, $6, $7, mm-hmm. you've just bumped the price up by that amount of money. And so it's like, why would you do that? Mm-hmm. So it sort of counteracts the whole thing. So bottle bills, I think people in the industry should be a lot more up in arms about the sort of the recycling bottle bill type things. That's a scary thing coming.
Yeah, we talk about, Jill and I have talked about it a number of times. The scary things that are coming that people are not worried enough about are, distribution and these laws and stuff that are changing, and they're changing without much of the industry's notice. But ingredients lists, recycling bills, things like that those are all things that we should be worried about, and the consumer should be worried most, because the harder it is for a producer to make a bottle of wine, eventually they're going to stop making the wine.
Well, the price is going to go up the time and the labor that's going into it and the hurdles that they have to go around.
I mean, I still maintain a firm belief that if we didn't have to, if a producer could make a bottle of wine for $10 and sell it for $15 and make $5 on that, somebody somewhere in the industry or the government is going to find a way to get a little bit extra off of that concept. If a small producer is able to,
they want their piece of the pie.
Everybody's got to take it, and it just becomes this thing where nobody's going to make a bottle of wine. At some point, everybody's just going to throw their hands up, and we'll all be drinking, grocery store wine from the big five that mostly brings it in from South America now.
Right, which is a funny piece as you bring this up, because the whole 3-tier system was to create the situation where you had this separation between the producer and the retailer. But I mean, if you think about Costco and their Kirkland brand wines, well, Costco is the retailer, and it's their branded product.
Mm-hmm.
You've lost the whole concept, people. It's like
by just changing the name, they're able to do that.
Yeah, and every retailer has their own house wines these days. It's not necessarily, I'm not going to walk in and find a Safeway wine or an Albertsons or a Kroger wine.
Right.
But it'll be a brand that is exclusively made for them, and nobody knows.
Yep. I think Trader Joe's is the most ridiculous. I always hear people say, like, Trader Joe's has really good cheap wine. And I always have to tell people, like, they didn't buy that from a producer. That's unheard of. They just bought a bunch of bulk wine and bottled it up in their own facility and gave it a funny name or a cool label that, and charged $5 for it.
From the large producer that you buy.
They've stopped doing that entirely now. Trader Joe's just puts Trader Joe red wine or sparkling wine or white wine or soft wine. They just straight with it now. They're not even hiding it anymore.
Yeah, there was the time where people would do the Trader Joe's and they say, "Oh, check out this bottle, pull the cork, and you'll see whose wine it really was." Because that used to, it was kind of that exciting thing of like finding out whose you were. But so this is what puts the ridiculousness of like our experiences with the Virginia ABC. Like I say, I think it's barrier control as opposed to beverage control, because they are not helping the industry. They're worrying about some small quantities of product drop shipping directly in where the taxes are paid and where everything is legit. But meanwhile, these big picture things of like, the wholesalers that are supporting the ABC in terms of legislation and stuff are bringing in mass amounts of international product. And I don't want to diss the international product either, but I think that's the experience for consumers to try, domestic and international. I think that's the whole thing about wine. It's lovely.
Not at the expense of killing an entire industry.
Exactly. And I'm there with you on that one. It's like it shouldn't damage our industry, but if you force a system as we do now, it does do damage.
I think it's time to maybe overhaul a lot of this and, educate consumers I always encourage people to get educated, whether it's about wine or alcohol or cars or computers, or it's just whatever you're spending your money on, you should educate yourself. But, as we educate ourselves, we can, make better decisions in government, and, maybe we can have those conversations with lawmakers and policymakers. And, that's kind of where I see some of this changing, as an industry. We have all of these associations and boards and compliance officers and lawyers, and nobody thinks for a second that maybe the ABC board shouldn't be taking advice from the Wholesalers Association,
or having one of their previous members as the head of the entire organization.
Yeah, I just that to me is a little not.
It just smells a little bit.
Well, it doesn't pass the sniff test. You're most certainly correct.
It doesn't, and yet there's plenty of opportunity, but it's like where are you going to look to do this and help the industry and not hinder the industry, and it's consumer choice. It's at the end of the day, we've got to get the product to consumer, and the harder we make that, the worse it is.
I think, and it's funny because we hear, and thinking about this now, I hear all the time from other winemakers and wine owners, like, we've got this piece of the pie, that's all that's available to us. And, what they're not realizing is that piece of the pie is that small because we're allowing these policies and these laws to be made unchecked. And if we can't get our product to the consumer because of how difficult it is, then that will never change.
Right. So a lot of it is legislative education. But you have to understand that money speaks, and that is going into the legislators' pockets. Obviously not literally, but it
Maybe.
is going into but it's going into the fact of that it's influencing them, because it is a countrywide, it is a pay to play market. It's as
Right.
correct. I mean, there are other countries where, for the way that the money is distributed to these committees and stuff, people would go to jail in other countries because it would be truly called what it is, which is a bribe, and the
Right.
rest. In here, it's you can do it through packs and all of this other legal jumbo. So, but favors are done because of the way it's done, and it's just what bothers me, and it's the reason we started the business, which is to help the consumer, but really help the small producer get their product. And we see everything. I mean, we know that, Total Wines carries 8,000, maybe 9,000 SKUs in the wine industry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we basically can see, we make 65,000 SKUs available to the consumer in the country. Through the network of products that we have available. I mean, that's what people want. If people didn't want it, they wouldn't be buying it.
Right.
They wouldn't buy that. The Thanksgiving wine and things like that. I mean, those things wouldn't happen. But this is where innovations happen. The rosés that were nothing and then exploded, and now the orange wines that are coming through. Co-ferments, I think originally were probably called field blends, but now they're doing some innovative things in co-ferment. But somebody's going to make 150 cases of a co-ferment. No distributor is going to have that, but there's 600 people around the country that would like to try that wine, and you've just got to get it out there, and you build markets that way. And as a country or at a state level, we're just not doing enough. Keep building barriers to make it harder for people.
Right. And eventually somebody's going to throw their hands up. And so maybe that's part of, I would say that's part of the reason why wine sales are continuing to dive or stagnate.
Mm-hmm.
Plateau.
Yeah. All right, Jill.
This is Wine Fringe.
I'm Jake Blottinger. We were here with Stephen Harrison. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Jill Smedley, and we'll talk to you guys next time.